All right, today we're going to talk about cell theory. So, a long time ago, when the microscope was invented, scientists looked at stuff under the microscope and they came to realize that there were things that made up these bigger items that they were looking at. And they came to call these cells. In the earliest days, scientists didn't know a lot about cells. We're talking 1800s, 1600s, and they had to figure some stuff out. Based on what they looked at under the microscope, they saw a variety of different things. And a couple different scientists ended up making some key discoveries. These key discoveries led to statements that would be put in our cell theory. 3 really big statements that tell us some really key ideas about cells. So our learning targets, which you can highlight, these are the things you're responsible for: stating the 3 parts of the cell theory and providing evidence for the claim that all living things are made of cells. In class, we did an activity where we had to sort pictures based on whether or not they had cells. I didn't give the students the names. They didn't have plastic or thread or blood or onion. They just had the pictures. And they had to figure out if they had cells. Imagine our scientists back in the day. They had to figure this out too. They were looking at things, and they came to realize that some of them had these repeating patterns that they ended up calling cells. When they took a look at all the things that had cells, they realized they had something in common. They realized that all organisms, all living things are made out of cells. Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as all living things are made of cells, sometimes just all organisms, because organisms are living things. They're all made of cells. How do they know? Well, like I said, they looked at stuff under the microscope, and all the stuff that was living or used to be living, bone, blood, muscle, had cells. Non-living stuff like rocks and glass did not have cells. If you need to continue writing, go ahead and pause the video right now. The next thing they figured out is when we look at organisms, the smallest thing that can be living is a cell. You do not need to write down the 7 characteristics of life here. Those are just there for you to reference. So in order to be living, something has to be able to use energy and respond, grow, develop, all of these different things. We did a sort the other day where we sorted elements, and then we sorted cell parts, and then cells and organs, organ systems. Out of all those things, only a cell is the smallest part we can go down to where it will still be alive on its own. If we go to a cell part like a DNA or a ribosome, that can't live on its own. It has to be inside of a cell, inside of a living thing. Atoms like carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, those are not living. Sure, they're in living things, but they themselves are not living. How did scientists figure this out? Well, when they were looking at stuff underneath the microscope, for example, maybe they're looking at some pond water here, and they put a drop, and then they go under the microscope. They saw these things moving around, and they noticed that some of them only had 1 cell. Now, if you're a scientist, you had to figure this out. Like, how would you know that these little green things aren't cells? This guy's really only 1 cell, okay? So they saw that certain things only had 1 cell, and they were still able to live and move and grow and do all of the things. Here's some other organisms under the microscope. Again, these organisms, this guy, 1 cell. Scientists had to be pretty smart to figure that out. If it were me, I'd probably say all these little things are cells. Remember, they didn't know a lot about cells. So from this, right, a cell is the smallest living thing that can do all those 7 characteristics of life. So how do we know? When we look under a microscope, we see organisms that are made of only 1 cell. The smallest thing we can find that's still alive is only made of 1 cell. Again, pause here if you need to write this down. The last thing is, where do cells come from? Okay, so cells, scientists used to think that cells came from thin air. They just magically appeared. We know today that's not the case. The reason they thought that is because like mold would just appear on bread. They didn't see it in the air. Now we know that mold can live in the air and we just don't even see it. So scientists came to realize that cells actually can only come from other cells. And when that mold is growing on your bread, It's because a cell from the air, a mold cell, landed on that bread and then divided. You guys know about mitosis or cell division? So cells come from other existing cells, pre-existing cells. So these are the three parts of the cell theory that scientists developed, came up with over